This story starts in August 2022 with a record and with no particular plan. I guess it's not even really with a record, but with a bug in the Android Auto app. Now, I'd never really thought about vinyl. I know people get really into it and that it was growing in popularity, but mostly I was just fascinated with the fact that it looked to be going to outlast CDs. CDs were an era-defining technology. They were cheap, ubiquitous, almost indestructible, small, easy to store and transport in large numbers, and super easy to actually play. Even your gran could power on the CD player and press the play button. But streaming had trumped CDs on almost every feature, with the added benefit that you didn't even need to be selective about what was in your collection. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In 2002, I was listening to Spotify in the car using Android Auto, but my aging mobile phone developed a bug. When I turned off the ignition, Spotify would disconnect from the car, but just keep playing to itself. I got stung a couple of times with using up all my mobile data. That dates this quite a lot. But mostly it was just pulling audio across my home Wi-Fi and singing to itself with the phone on 0% volume. And sometimes it would be a whole weekend before I noticed it was doing it and finally press pause and put it out of its misery. I must have been listening to Creedence Clearwater Revival in the car, which I still do a lot. And then it must have continued playing to itself, because I got an email from Spotify saying that I was a top listener for Creedence Clearwater Revival, having listened to over 200 hours in a month. And they had a special offer for me, and that made me feel very special. What they had was a new issue of Creedence Clearwater Revival at the Royal Albert Hall. It was an LP, and Spotify fan exclusive meant you could get it in gold vinyl. Now, it didn't make a lot of sense because I didn't own a record player, but the gold vinyl did look awesome, and it was only £25. I figured I would get the album and put it in one of those, gold record frames and display it on the wall. Now, there were a few problems in actually getting my record. The UK distributor actually went under, and it ended up having to come from the US, at which point I was starting to wonder if the whole thing was a scam. Wouldn't have been the end of the world. In September, but it did arrive, and the first thing that I noticed is that it's not golden. It looks like a pressing plant was hastily asked to make a limited number of gold-ish records with whatever colours they could come up with quickly. And let's be honest, it's basically brown. And the cover art is a bit more bland than I hoped. So this was not going to go on my wall as art. But I took it to my friends who had a record player, and we played it. And it did indeed contain Creedence Clearwater Revival, which wasn't at all guaranteed given the experience so far. And we were talking, and I asked him what he thought I should do with it. And he suggested that I should get a record player and play it, since that's what it's for, and you can get inexpensive record players. And I thought about that idea and what I might do with one record, and that's kind of where the idea for this project came from. So let's talk about music collections briefly. And this window of experience is unique to the years that I grew up in. Among my friends growing up, we had CD collections. And when we were young, before financial independence, we would ask our families for CDs as Christmas and birthday gifts. And looking back, they made great gifts because they were small, cheap, easily available, you could post them, and there was no ambiguity about what you'd asked for. There was just that CD. It was never a disappointment to unwrap a CD because you could go and put it on and play it right away. Occasionally, you get a duplicate from a well-meaning aunt, and one of your friends would benefit because you could just give it away. You still had it, or a copy of it, if your aunt came round. And it was really cool. Another factor was that you could tell a lot about a person from nosing through the CDs on their rack. Do they have 12 albums? which was kind of normal? Do they have 120 albums, which was lavish, bordering on madness? Were they all the same artist or the same genre? Are there any classical albums in there? Did they put the discs back in the right cases? Or, big red flag, do they have a stack of loose discs just in a pile? You could say, oh, I've got that one, and I've got that one, and I want to get that one. And you were instantly, bonding over the music in your collections. In case it's not obvious, I miss those days, because we ruined it. As soon as we could, we would just buy CDs, hundreds of CDs, and we'd fill floor-to-ceiling racks with them and plastic totes full of them. And that's not a music collection anymore, that's a dysfunction. But then MP3s came, and ignoring the whole piracy concerns, we would studiously copy all of our CDs onto our computers for ease of playing. And now you could shuffle for the first time. I don't mean like a 5-disc multi-changer that you would have and that would jam randomly. I mean hundreds of hours of MP3s could be in an uncurated and randomly delivered playlist. And people would brag about how many thousands of MP3s they had. And the people who weren't competing in the bigger is better race would just share their collections wholesale, copy and paste. So there was nothing unique or telling about what music you had anymore. And for us, this was the unnoticed death of the music collection. So I decided to do an experiment. What would I have in my music collection if I were to start from scratch? Now, I've not given up on Spotify or anything crazy, but I bought myself a cheap record player and some great speakers. That's a whole story in itself. But I decided to start a record collection, and I would set a limit of no more than 1 album a month, 12 a year. Sounds a bit ludicrous in today's world, but when I was a teenager, I was happy with half of that, arguably happier. So I need to choose albums that I would want to listen to for a month. Not in a psychotic way, but in a way where I could really appreciate having something new in the collection and really draw value out of that acquisition. Do you see what I'm getting at? And then at the end of the 12 months, if someone were to ask me, what music are you into? Then I could say instantly the dozen albums that made up my music collection, my top 12 albums of all time. And I've kept doing this within some epsilon for the past year and a half. So now I have nearly 24 great albums. And I'm wondering if I should stop, if I can stop. At what point does the collection reach its natural limit? Do I just end up with a floor-to-ceiling stack of vinyl the way we did CDs? Or could I say, okay, this is enough. If I want something else, it's on Spotify. So what I've decided, I'm going to take a bit of time and I'm going to look at each of these purchases. I'm going to make another short video, I expect. And I'm going to look at what these mean to me and why I purchased them. Whilst going through this process, I'm going to make a decision about what I do. Do I keep hoarding? Do I keep buying more? Do I arbitrarily set a limit? It's an interesting question. I don't know the answer yet. Anyway, if you're interested, please feel free to follow along. Thank you very much.